since 1738 was anything but romantic. Garbage littered the streets. Plagues ran rampant. Citizens would dump their toilet waste directly onto the streets from their second-floor windows, leaving the entire city engulfed in a suffocating stench. Near a fish stall reeking of rotten filth, a woman collapsed to the ground, her face twisted in pain. Gasping desperately, she gave birth to her fifth child, the sound of water splashing accompanying the process. Having lost her previous children, she held no expectations for this one either. Without a second thought, she grabbed a knife and blindly cut the umbilical cord that tied her to the newborn. The poor, fragile infant had not even glimpsed the world, yet was already discarded into a pile of garbage. But despite the lack of care and love, the baby clung to life with astonishing resilience. Though his eyes remained shut, his sense of smell was already exploring this foul, filthy world. The stench of fish, the rot of waste, the sourness of decay, all flooding his nostrils. A moment later, he opened his eyes and let out a piercing cry of protest. Hearing the wails, the surrounding people peered into the pile of filth, spotting the newborn, and because of this very cry, his mother was sentenced to death, hanged on the gallows. Thus, Grenouille entered the world as an orphan. An orphan's only fate was the orphanage. But from the moment he arrived, he was shunned and resented by the other children for reasons unknown. Some even tried to suffocate him in his cradle. Luckily, the caretaker intervened in time, sparing him from an early death. By the age of 5, Grenouille still could not speak, yet his sense of smell had grown incredibly sharp. He could identify every individual's unique scent, and even distinguish objects around him purely by smell. Even from dozens of meters away, he could detect the tiny frog eggs floating in a pond. Yet, this extraordinary gift brought him no salvation. At 13, the orphanage director, treating him like livestock, sold him off at a dirt-cheap price to a tanner as forced labor. But fate had its own plans. The director had barely left with his payment before being slain by bandits. It was almost as if anyone who abandoned Grenouille was destined for doom. At the time, the average life expectancy in Paris was no more than 35 to 40 years. Yet Grenouille, born into the filthiest depths of society, miraculously survived into adulthood. One day, by chance, he followed the tanner into a bustling town. It was only then that he realized scents could be so diverse, so mesmerizing. His steps faltered, his nostrils flared, at first hesitantly, then greedily, like a bellows out of control. It was a primal ecstasy, impossible to suppress. Every fiber of his being seemed to transform into a sensor for scent, desperately drinking in the countless fragrances lingering in the air. The warm aroma of bread, the richness of cheese, the oil of a gentleman's hair, the delicate sweat of noblewomen. He was enthralled, his face frozen between awe and hunger. As if hypnotized, he drifted toward a perfume shop. At the time, European nobility rarely bathed, leaving their bodies rancid and sour. They relied on perfume to mask the stench. Inside the store, wealthy ladies lined up, eager to buy the nation's most coveted fragrance, Amor et Psyche. With a single drop, its mist-like aroma spread throughout the boutique. But Grenouille soon realized the scent that truly enchanted him did not come from any of the bottles. Following his instincts, he searched further, and at last, his gaze locked onto a young girl selling apricots in the distance. He was obsessed with her scent, trailing her all the way home, breathing it in greedily. At first, it seemed like the beginning of love, but instead, it marked the descent into horror. To avoid being seen, he covered her mouth and nose. But in this moment of panic, he made a fatal mistake. His hands robbed her of breath. The girl was gone, and with her last breath, so too vanished the intoxicating fragrance that had enchanted him. For the first time, Grenouille was lost, but his uncertainty was not born of guilt. Rather, it was the terror of losing something beautiful. So he stripped her bare, his trembling hands tracing her skin, as if desperately trying to hold onto the last fragments of her scent. He inhaled the lingering scent of her body deeply, as if it was the only way to ease his restless mind. At midnight, Grenouille tossed and turned, his heart hollowed by an emptiness he had never felt before. He recalled the scent of the young girl once again, and suddenly, it became clear why he had fought so hard to survive all these years. Every hardship of the past had become a stepping stone to his ultimate realization. At this moment, he knew with absolute certainty his purpose in life: to learn the art of preserving human scent. But as a mere laborer, Grenouille had no means of making perfume, until one day, while delivering goods, he stumbled upon an aging perfume shop. The shop owner, Baldini, had once created a few hit fragrances and enjoyed a fleeting moment of fame. However, the rise of Amor et Psyche had instantly crushed his career. sending him into obscurity, though he publicly mocked the new fragrance, calling it vulgar and unrefined. In secret, he was desperately studying its formula, hoping to recreate it and reclaim his success, but his talent had run dry, and failure after failure only confirmed his downfall, until Grenouille arrived and changed everything. He boldly claimed to have the sharpest nose in all of Paris, capable of identifying every scent in the world. With Baldini's skeptical gaze fixed upon him, Grenouille calmly began to recreate a more ET psyche, completely disregarding traditional perfuming techniques. One by one, he dumped the chosen ingredients into a container, his movements rough and careless, making Baldini's frown deepen with disapproval. But the moment the lid was lifted, the scent was identical. Yet, Grenouille wasn't satisfied. He claimed it could be even better. He rummaged through the shelves, pulling out a pile of new ingredients. Just as he completed his improved version, ready for a test, Baldini's expression suddenly changed, and he threw Grenouille out of the shop. Grenouille was utterly confused. What he didn't realize was that Baldini's outburst wasn't out of arrogance but a last-ditch effort to protect what little pride he had left. But in the end, curiosity won over dignity, and Baldini couldn't resist. He opened the bottle. With just a single sniff, the scent consumed his entire being, as if transporting him to another world, isolated from time itself. He didn't want to admit it, but Grenouille was a perfuming genius. At first light the next morning, Baldini rushed to the tannery, offering 10 times the price to buy Grenouille from his master, turning him into his golden goose. And just as planned, Grenouille was now exactly where he wanted to be. The tanner, thrilled with his unexpected fortune, couldn't be happier. What he didn't know was those who discarded Grenouille never met a good end. Sure enough, that very night, he fell into the river and drowned. From the moment Grenouille entered Baldini's shop, one best-selling fragrance after another was born. The once deserted store became a thriving business overnight, attracting Parisian nobles from all corners. And in exchange for this success, Baldini imparted every bit of his perfuming knowledge to Grenouille. A standard perfume usually consisted of 12 carefully balanced ingredients, but according to ancient texts, there was a legend of a 13th essence. It was said that whoever possessed it could create a perfume so divine, it would enslave the hearts of all who smelled it. Yet, no one knew what this elusive 13th essence was. Upon hearing this, Grenouille's mind flashed back to the apricot-selling girl his heart stirred. He was convinced that the scent of a young maiden was the legendary 13th ingredient, and he made a silent vow he would extract it, no matter the cost. Baldini introduced him to the art of distillation. The process was extravagantly wasteful, requiring thousands of fresh roses to be placed in a distillation barrel, where, after a painstaking extraction, they would yield just a single ounce of rose oil. During this process, Grenouille experienced a revelation both cruel and beautiful. Roses withered and died, yet their fragrance lived on, reborn through extraction, more mystical and eternal. At the moment the first drop of oil fell, he felt as if he had glimpsed the soul of the rose itself, as if it had ascended beyond mortality. In his naivety, Grenouille believed that mastering distillation meant he had unlocked the secret to capturing every scent in the world. So, one night, when no one was watching, he placed a cat inside the distillation barrel. The result was a complete failure. Baldini scolded him, saying, "You can't distill the scent of a cat any more than you can distill the scent of a human." Hearing this, Grenouille's entire belief system collapsed. It was as if his soul had been ripped from his body. He fainted on the spot and fell gravely ill. Doctors were baffled by his condition, but unanimously agreed he would not survive the month. Baldini was in a panic. He had only just begun to taste the sweetness of success. How could he allow Grenouille to slip away? Desperate, he revealed to Grenouille another method of preserving scent, the enfleurage technique. But to master this technique, one had to travel to the perfume capital Grasse. Upon hearing this, Grenouille's lifeless eyes suddenly lit up. In just one night, he made a miraculous recovery, his mind consumed by a burning desire to begin his journey. But Baldini, ever greedy, was not about to let him go so easily. Only when Grenouille agreed to leave behind 100 perfume formulas did he finally relent. Baldini believed he had struck gold. With these recipes, he was certain he would become a legend in the world of perfumery. But fate had other plans. That very night, Baldini's shop collapsed, burying both him and the 100 formulas in the rubble. On his journey to Grasse, Grenouille suddenly realized something unsettling. He had always believed that every living thing had a unique scent, a signature as distinct as a soul, but now he had none. Lack of scent filled him with dread, as if he had been erased from the world itself. A deep, Agonizing longing surged within him. He had to extract the scent of young maidens. Only then could he craft his own identity, his own soul in a bottle. As if guided by fate, Grenouille arrived in Grasse, where he immediately sensed a familiar fragrance. The scent belonged to Laure, the daughter of a nobleman. Her scent was identical to the apricot girl. She was the final piece to his masterpiece. But noble birth made her inaccessible for now. Determined, Grenouille took work at a flower processing factory. With unnatural speed and precision, he mastered the enfleurage technique. Soon, he set his sights on a young girl in the factory, a girl with the most fragrant skin. Without hesitation, he took her life, preserving her body in a tub of oil. But the results disappointed him. Still, he was undeterred. He learned from failure. He realized that the key was fully saturating the body in fat. So, he turned his cold, calculated gaze onto a streetwalker. When she saw a jar of fat, she assumed Grenouille had an unusual fetish. But when he pulled out a knife, she knew this was no ordinary customer. Grenouille's eyes turned sharp and menacing. Without a sound, he raised the hammer and struck down hard, catching the woman completely off guard. With chilling indifference, he cut off her hair, wrapped it carefully in layers of cloth, and felt no remorse for taking a life. After a long day and night of waiting, the woman's unique scent had been fully absorbed into the fat. A flicker of excitement flashed through Grenouille's eyes. He carefully began the process of scraping off the infused fat, his hands meticulously precise, ensuring he wouldn't damage the fragrance he had fought so hard to capture. This time, he combined the enfleurage technique with distillation, extracting the essence and letting a single drop fall onto his skin. The woman's pet dog sniffed the familiar scent and immediately wagged its tail, running toward him. It worked. The experiment was a success. Grenouille had finally captured the scent he had been longing for. The mythical 13th essence was starting to take shape in his mind. He prepared 13 elegant bottles, each one destined to hold the fragrance of a different young woman. Soon, a pair of twin girls became his next unfortunate targets. They had been playing a simple game of hide-and-seek, never imagining this game would cost them their lives. The scent of their innocence, like two imprisoned souls, was sealed inside Grenouille's bottles, and it was in this twisted journey of obsession and crime that Grenouille made a shocking discovery. The perfume he extracted held a strange and irresistible power over people. Even the short-tempered factory foreman, after inhaling just a trace of the scent, became uncharacteristically gentle and affectionate. As the days passed, more and more young women vanished. One by one, their bodies were found in the streets, their hair completely removed. There were no wounds, no signs of assault, nothing, except one eerie commonality. They were all stunningly beautiful, and they were all virgins. The city was in a state of panic. No one could understand the killer's motives. But one thing was certain: this monster was collecting beauty itself. To prevent more tragedies, a citywide curfew was enforced. Fathers sealed their windows and kept their daughters under constant watch. But unable to find another victim, Grenouille set his sights on a convent. There, he silently took the life of a young nun. This act of sacrilege sent shockwaves through the city. The archbishop, filled with rage, stood before the people and swore that once the murderer was caught, he would be torn apart limb by limb. Now, Grenouille was just one step away from completing his masterpiece. He needed one final bottle, one last perfect scent to create the ultimate perfume, and his final ingredient was Laure, the daughter of a count. Her scent was identical to that of the apricot girl, the missing piece to his formula of perfection. But just as Grenouille was about to make his move, he realized Laure's scent was getting farther away. Her father, sensing danger, had arranged for her to be taken away from the city. But even distance couldn't save her. Grenouille tracked her scent beyond the city walls. At the same time, back in Grenouille's workshop, the factory foreman made a horrifying discovery: a pile of women's hair and clothing. Realizing the connection to the recent serial murders, he immediately alerted the authorities. Soldiers were sent to capture Grenouille, but by then, he was already miles away. Following Laure's trail, she had taken shelter in an inn, guarded by vicious attack dogs at the entrance. But Grenouille had no natural scent. The dogs didn't even notice him as he slipped inside. He stood beside her bed, staring down at her sleeping form, his eyes burning with twisted desire. To Grenouille, Laure was an angel, the most exquisite being to ever walk the earth. But time would eventually steal away her beauty. Only by preserving her scent in a bottle could she remain eternal. After taking the lives of 13 innocent women, Grenouille finally had his complete collection of fragrances. One by one, he carefully blended the essences. With the final drop, the legendary perfume was born, a fragrance so divine, it couldn't slave the world. But just as he finished, the soldiers arrived. They had no idea that Grenouille now held a weapon far greater than any blade. After his arrest, the first to interrogate him was Laura's father. His voice trembled between rage and sorrow. "Why?" he demanded. "Why my daughter? What has she ever done to you?" Grenouille simply replied, "I needed her." His execution was set. Tens of thousands gathered at the execution square, eager to witness his brutal death. Inside the prison, Grenouille remained calm, clutching the small bottle of perfume. He waited. As the guards came to escort him to the gallows, he uncorked the bottle. A strange and enchanting aroma spread through the air. The moment people inhaled it, they fell under his spell. Yet, Grenouille did not run. Instead, he dressed himself in royal garments and stepped proudly onto the execution platform. Then, a gust of wind carried his scent through the crowd. Where anger and hatred once burned, now stood only worship and awe. Even the execution of the man who was meant to end his life fell to his knees before him. Grenouille lifted his handkerchief, letting a single drop of perfume dissolve into the air. The scent spread like a divine blessing, reducing the crowd to utter hysteria. Even the archbishop, who had sworn to see him butchered, forgot why he was there. The perfume awakened the deepest instincts within them. Soon, people began tearing off their clothes, embracing each other in a frenzied, orgiastic display. As he watched thousands succumb to pleasure, Grenouille suddenly understood. This perfume could conquer the world, but there was no joy in his victory, because in his mind, he saw the girl he had met so long ago. In his imagination, she smiled at him, her eyes filled with love, and in that moment, he finally understood. That first breathtaking scent he had encountered, that was love. Now, he possessed the power to control everything, but he could never control love, and the memory of that lost scent became the greatest pain of his existence. Grenouille had fought to survive, desperate to find his place in the world, but in his obsession and madness, he had lost everything that made him human. Now, he was nothing but a hollow shell, pitiful and tragic. On June 25, 1767, he returned to the place of his birth, a slum filled with thieves, murderers, prostitutes, and fugitives. There, he poured every last drop of the perfume over himself. The scent drove the crowd into a wild, frenzied desire. They rushed at him, kissing, biting, devouring him. His genius and his beloved fragrance became one, and in the filth of a Parisian marketplace, he vanished into nothingness. He had never truly existed, and in a final burst of scent, he disappeared like he had never been born. He possessed the most acute sense of smell in the world, able to distinguish every scent known to man, yet he could not smell himself. Because he had no scent, he drifted through the streets like a ghost, unnoticed by all. Because he had no scent, he flickered like a dying candle, unseen and unimportant. A person without a scent is like a person without a life, without a home. To the world, he was invisible, and so, he had to create the most perfect perfume ever made. In a way, it was his final attempt to prove he existed. What he truly longed for was not the fragrance itself, but the attention and love it could bring him. He believed that if he could create the ultimate perfume, he would finally be loved by the world. But in the moment his fragrance bloomed, as the world knelt before him in reverence, all he saw were hollow souls and false devotion. And at last, he understood. What he truly wanted had never been power or admiration. What he needed was something he could never create. He had lived, but for what purpose? I'm a movie enthusiast. Please subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you next time.